The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training grounds as 23-year-old Sarah Martinez stepped off the bus that would change her life forever. Her combat boots hit the dusty ground with determination, but inside her stomach churned with a mixture of excitement and fear. She had worked for 3 years to earn her place at this elite military training facility, and nothing would make her quit now. Sarah adjusted her perfectly pressed uniform and shouldered her duffel bag. Around her, other new recruits were doing the same, but she noticed something immediately. She was the only woman in a group of 15 cadets. The others were all men, most of them bigger and louder than her. Some looked her way with curious glances, others with barely hidden smirks. Commander James Sullivan stood at the edge of the training ground, watching the new arrivals with the sharp eyes of someone who had seen it all. At 52 years old, Sullivan was a legend in military circles. He had spent 25 years as a Navy SEAL, completing some of the most dangerous missions around the world. His weathered face told stories of battles fought and won, and his calm presence commanded respect from everyone who met him. 3 years ago, Sullivan had retired from active duty and taken a position training the next generation of military personnel. He believed strongly that the best soldiers came in all shapes and sizes, and that determination mattered more than physical strength. But he also knew that not everyone shared his views. As the recruits lined up for their first briefing, Sarah found herself standing between 2 particularly large cadets. On her left was Marcus Thompson, a 25-year-old former college football player who stood 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighed over 200 pounds. His arms were like tree trunks, and he had the kind of cocky smile that suggested he thought this training would be easy. On her right stood Derek Hayes, another imposing figure who had grown up on a ranch and looked like he could wrestle a bull. Both men towered over Sarah's 5'6" frame, and she could feel their eyes on her as Commander Sullivan began to speak. Sullivan's voice carried across the training ground like a rifle shot. He explained the rigorous program ahead of them, the physical challenges, the mental tests, and the teamwork exercises that would push them to their limits. He made it clear that only the strongest would graduate, and that strength came in many forms. During the first week of training, Sarah threw herself into every challenge with fierce determination. She was often the first to volunteer for difficult tasks and stayed late to practice skills she found challenging. Her marksmanship was excellent, her knowledge of military protocol was thorough, and her leadership skills impressed the instructors. But physical training was where she struggled most. During morning runs, she often fell behind the faster male recruits. In the weight room, she couldn't lift as much as the others. During obstacle courses, her smaller size made certain challenges more difficult, though she never gave up and always finished every exercise. Marcus and Derek began to notice Sarah's struggles during physical training, and they saw an opportunity to make themselves look better by making her look worse. It started with small comments during meals, loud enough for others to hear but quiet enough that instructors might miss them. Maybe she should try out for the cooking corps instead, Marcus would say with a laugh as Sarah struggled with a particularly heavy pack during a hiking exercise. I don't know why they even let women try this program, Derek would add. It's just a waste of everyone's time. Sarah tried to ignore the comments and focus on her training. She had dealt with doubters before and knew that proving herself through actions was better than arguing with words. But as the days passed, the comments became more frequent and more cruel. During a team-building exercise where recruits had to work together to carry heavy equipment across rough terrain, Marcus and Derek made sure Sarah was given the heaviest items to carry. When she asked for help, they pretended not to hear her. When she fell behind, they made loud comments about how she was slowing down the whole team. Other recruits began to notice what was happening, but most were too focused on their own survival in the program to get involved. A few felt bad for Sarah, but they were afraid that standing up for her might make them targets too. The situation got worse during a particularly challenging week of survival training. Recruits were divided into small teams and dropped in a remote forest area with minimal supplies. They had to work together to navigate back to base camp while completing various challenges along the way. Sarah found herself on a team with Marcus, Derek, and 2 other recruits named Paul and Alex. From the moment they were dropped off, Marcus took charge of the group and made it clear that he considered Sarah a liability. "We need to move fast if we want to win this exercise," Marcus announced. "Everyone needs to pull their weight. And some people," he looked directly at Sarah, "need to keep up or get left behind." The team had to cross a fast-moving stream using only the materials they could find in the forest. It was a test of creativity and teamwork, but Marcus and Derek turned it into a test of whether they could make Sarah fail. They deliberately chose a crossing point that would be most difficult for someone of Sarah's height, then refused to help her across when she struggled with the strong current. Paul and Alex wanted to help, but Marcus threatened to report them for not following orders if they did. Sarah made it across the stream on her own, but she was soaked and exhausted. Her teammates offered no help as she shivered in the cold mountain air, and Derek made sure to mention loudly how much time her incompetence had cost the team. That night, as the team made camp, the temperature dropped significantly. Sarah's wet clothes from the stream crossing made it difficult for her to stay warm, and she spent most of the night fighting off hypothermia while her teammates slept comfortably. The next morning, Sarah was clearly unwell, but she refused to quit or ask for medical help. She forced herself to continue with the exercise, even as Marcus and Derek made increasingly nasty comments about her appearance and abilities. Commander Sullivan was monitoring all the teams through hidden cameras and radio check-ins, with instructors positioned throughout the forest. He had been watching Sarah's team with growing concern, not because of her performance, but because of how her teammates were treating her. Sullivan recognized something in Sarah that reminded him of his early days in the SEALs. She had the same determination, the same refusal to give up even when everything seemed impossible. More importantly, she was showing the kind of character under pressure that made truly great soldiers. But he also saw something else that made his blood boil. Marcus and Derek were displaying the exact opposite of the values the military was supposed to represent. Instead of supporting a teammate, they were actively trying to sabotage her. Instead of showing leadership, they were showing cruelty. As Sullivan watched the situation unfold, he began planning something that would teach all his recruits a lesson they would never forget. He had dealt with bullies before during his years of service, and he knew that sometimes the only way to stop them was to show them exactly how it felt to be on the receiving end. The survival exercise ended with Sarah's team finishing last, largely due to the dysfunction Marcus and Derek had created. But Sarah had completed every single challenge, never quit, and maintained her composure even under the worst treatment from her teammates. When the teams returned to base camp, Sarah was exhausted and demoralized, but she still reported to Commander Sullivan with her head held high. She gave a complete briefing of the exercise without once complaining about her teammates or making excuses for the team's poor performance. Sullivan listened to her report with growing respect. Here was a soldier who understood that the mission came first, even when personal relationships made things difficult. She was exactly the kind of person he wanted, representing the military. But Marcus and Derek had no idea what was coming for them. As they celebrated what they thought was a successful effort to drive Sarah out of the program, Commander Sullivan was putting the finishing touches on a plan that would change everything. The next phase of training was about to begin, and Sullivan had decided it was time to teach his recruits what real leadership looked like. More importantly, he was going to show Marcus and Derek exactly why bullying had no place in his program or anywhere else in the military. Sarah went to sleep that night, wondering if she had the strength to continue facing the hostility from her fellow recruits. She had no idea that help was coming from an unexpected source, or that her worst tormentors were about to learn a lesson they would remember for the rest of their lives. Commander Sullivan stood in his office before dawn, studying the personnel files spread across his desk. The morning light hadn't yet reached through his windows, but he had been awake for hours, planning what would happen next. In front of him lay the files of every recruit in his current class, but his attention was focused on 3 in particular. Sarah Martinez's file showed a young woman who had overcome significant obstacles to reach this point. She had grown up in a single-parent household after her father died in military service when she was 12. Her mother worked 2 jobs to support the family, and Sarah had earned her way through college with a combination of academic scholarships and part-time work. Her grades were excellent, her physical fitness scores were above average for women in her age group, and her psychological evaluations showed remarkable mental toughness. Marcus Thompson's file told a different story. He came from a wealthy family and had coasted through college on a football scholarship until a knee injury ended his sports career. His academic performance was mediocre, and while his physical capabilities were impressive, there were concerning notes about his attitude toward authority and his treatment of teammates he considered weaker than himself. Derek Hayes had grown up with every advantage that rural wealth could provide. His family owned thousands of acres of ranch land, and he had never faced real hardship or been forced to work with people different from himself. His file showed strong physical abilities but troubling patterns of aggressive behavior toward anyone he perceived as vulnerable. Sullivan closed the files and walked to his window, looking out at the training grounds where his recruits would soon begin another day of challenges. In his 25 years as a SEAL, he had learned that character mattered more than strength, and that true warriors protected the vulnerable instead of preying on them. He had also learned that sometimes the most important lessons couldn't be taught with words. Some people needed to experience exactly what they were putting others through before they could understand why their behavior was wrong. Sullivan picked up his phone and called Master Sergeant Rodriguez, his most trusted instructor. Rodriguez had served with Sullivan on multiple SEAL missions and shared his commander's values about leadership and teamwork. "Rodriguez, I need you to set up a special training exercise for today," Sullivan said. "I want you to create teams for a new challenge, but I'm going to give you some specific instructions about how to arrange things." An hour later, the recruits assembled for their morning briefing. Sarah stood among them, trying to hide how exhausted she still felt from the survival exercise. Her muscles ached, and the verbal abuse from Marcus and Derek had left emotional wounds that were harder to heal than physical ones. Marcus and Derek stood together, making quiet jokes about Sarah's appearance and predicting that she would finally quit soon. They had convinced themselves that they were helping her realize she didn't belong in a military program, not understanding that they were revealing their own unfitness for service. Commander Sullivan entered the briefing area with his usual commanding presence. His steel-gray eyes swept over the assembled recruits, lingering for a moment on Marcus and Derek, before moving on. "Today you will participate in a new type of exercise," Sullivan announced. "You will be divided into teams for an advanced tactical simulation. This exercise will test not only your individual skills, but your ability to work together under extreme pressure." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the group. "Master Sergeant Rodriguez will assign your teams and explain the details of the mission. Remember that in real combat situations, you must be able to trust and support every member of your unit, regardless of their background or appearance. Lives depend on teamwork." Rodriguez stepped forward and began reading off team assignments. As he called out names, it became clear that this exercise would be different from previous ones. Instead of the usual random groupings, the teams seemed carefully constructed. "Team Alpha," Rodriguez called out. Thompson, Hayes, Wilson, and Garcia. Marcus and Derek exchanged satisfied looks. They had been placed together without Sarah, which meant they could focus on the exercise without what they considered the distraction of a weak teammate. "Team Beta," Rodriguez continued. "Martinez, Jackson, Parker, Chen, and Brooks." Sarah found herself on a team with 4 other recruits who had shown themselves to be fair and supportive during previous exercises. For the first time in weeks, she felt a small spark of hope that she might be able to complete a challenge without facing constant negativity from her teammates. But Rodriguez wasn't finished with his announcements. "For this exercise, each team will be assigned a special advisor," he said. "These advisors are experienced military personnel who will observe your performance and provide guidance when needed." Sullivan stepped forward again, and his expression was deadly serious. "Team Alpha will be advised by Sergeant First Class Anderson and Gunnery Sergeant Williams," he announced. "Team Beta will be advised by myself." Marcus and Derek's confident expressions began to fade as they realized what this meant. They had been placed on a team without Sarah, but they had also been assigned advisors they didn't know, while Sarah's team would be working directly with the base commander. What Marcus and Derek didn't know was that Sergeant Anderson and Gunnery Sergeant Williams had been carefully selected for this exercise. Both were large, intimidating men who shared Sullivan's views about bullying and had been briefed thoroughly about the behavior they had witnessed from Team Alpha's members. The exercise itself was designed to test leadership and teamwork under stress. Each team was given a complex mission that required them to navigate through a series of obstacles while carrying heavy equipment and making strategic decisions under time pressure. For Sarah's team, Commander Sullivan proved to be an excellent advisor. He offered encouragement when they faced difficulties, provided tactical suggestions that helped them overcome obstacles, and made sure every team member felt valued and supported. Under his guidance, the team worked together smoothly and efficiently. Team Alpha's experience was dramatically different. From the moment the exercise began, Sergeant Anderson and Gunnery Sergeant Williams subjected Marcus and Derek to the same kind of treatment they had been giving Sarah. When Marcus made a minor mistake during the first obstacle, Anderson was immediately critical. "Thompson, what kind of amateur hour operation are you running here?" Anderson barked. "Maybe you should stick to easier exercises until you figure out how to handle the basics." When Derek struggled with a navigation challenge, Williams made sure everyone could hear his commentary. "Hayes, I've seen lost tourists with better sense of direction. Are you sure you belong in a program this advanced?" At first, Marcus and Derek tried to brush off the criticism, assuming it was just normal military-style discipline. But as the exercise continued, the comments became more personal and more relentless. "Thompson, you're moving like you're still carrying that football injury," Anderson said loudly during a running segment. "Maybe physical limitations mean some people just aren't cut out for this kind of work." "Hayes, your decision-making is slowing down the whole team," Williams added. "In real combat, that kind of incompetence gets people killed." The other members of Team Alpha, Wilson and Garcia, began to feel uncomfortable as they watched their advisors tear down Marcus and Derek with the same ruthless criticism that Marcus and Derek had been directing at Sarah. They started to realize how horrible it must have felt for her to face that kind of treatment day after day. As the exercise progressed, Marcus and Derek found themselves struggling with challenges they would normally handle easily. The constant criticism was affecting their confidence and their ability to think clearly. They began making mistakes they wouldn't normally make, which only brought more harsh comments from their advisors. During a team planning session, Anderson made sure to exclude Marcus from important decisions, just as Marcus had been excluding Sarah from team discussions. "Thompson, why don't you just focus on carrying equipment while the rest of us figure out strategy?" Anderson said dismissively. "Leadership requires certain qualities that not everyone possesses." When Derek tried to offer suggestions during a tactical discussion, Williams cut him off immediately. "Hayes, nobody asked for your input. When we need someone to state the obvious, we'll let you know." For the first time in their lives, Marcus and Derek were experiencing what it felt like to be treated as inferior by people in positions of power. The constant belittling was exhausting and demoralizing, and they began to understand why Sarah had looked so defeated during recent exercises. Meanwhile, Sarah's team was excelling under Commander Sullivan's supportive leadership. He made sure every team member had opportunities to contribute, praised good ideas regardless of who suggested them, and helped the team work through challenges without making anyone feel inadequate. "Martinez, excellent tactical thinking on that last obstacle," Sullivan said as Sarah successfully guided her team through a complex navigation challenge. "That's exactly the kind of innovative problem-solving we need in modern military operations." The contrast between the two teams became more obvious as the day progressed. Sarah's team was working together smoothly, building confidence and completing their objectives efficiently. Team Alpha was struggling with communication problems, growing frustration, and decreasing performance as Marcus and Derek became more demoralized. During a break in the exercise, Marcus and Derek sat apart from their teammates, looking exhausted and discouraged. For the first time, they were beginning to understand how their treatment of Sarah had affected not only her, but the entire team's performance. "This is ridiculous," Marcus said quietly to Derek. "These advisors are treating us like we're complete idiots." "I know," Derek replied. "It doesn't matter what we do right. They only focus on our mistakes. It makes it impossible to do our best work." Wilson, one of their other teammates, overheard the conversation and decided to speak up. "You know, he said carefully. "This is exactly how you guys have been treating Martinez for weeks. Now you know how it feels." I reply. Cried. In Martinez, Marcus and Derek looked at him in surprise, then looked at each other with growing realization. They had been so focused on what they saw as Sarah's weaknesses that they had never considered how their behavior was affecting her ability to perform. The exercise continued for several more hours, with Anderson and Williams maintaining their relentless criticism of Marcus and Derek. By the end of the day, both men were emotionally drained and beginning to question their own abilities. When the exercise finally concluded, Commander Sullivan gathered all the recruits together for a debriefing session. His expression was serious as he looked around the group, his gaze lingering on Marcus and Derek. "Today's exercise was designed to teach you something important about leadership and teamwork," he began. "Some of you learned that lesson. Others are about to learn it now." The debriefing room fell silent as Commander Sullivan's words hung in the air. Every recruit in the room could feel the weight of what was about to happen. Sarah sat quietly, still unaware of what the day's exercise had really been about. While Marcus and Derek shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, beginning to suspect that they had been the real targets of the lesson, Sullivan walked to the front of the room, his footsteps echoing in the silence. On the wall behind him was a large screen that he used for tactical presentations, but today it would serve a different purpose. "In my 25 years of military service," Sullivan began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had led men and women through life and death situations, "I have learned that the strongest military units are built on mutual respect and trust. I have also learned that a single toxic individual can destroy the effectiveness of an entire team." He pressed a button on a remote control, and the screen behind him lit up with video footage from the past several weeks of training. The recruits realized that their exercises had been recorded, and many began to understand that their behavior had been under constant observation. "What you are about to see," Sullivan continued, "is a compilation of interactions between certain members of this class over the past 3 weeks. I want everyone to pay close attention, because this represents everything that is wrong with military leadership." The first video clip showed Marcus making loud comments about Sarah's physical capabilities during a morning run. His voice was clearly audible as he suggested that women didn't belong in military training. The camera captured not only his words but also the effect they had on Sarah's expression and posture. Derek's voice could be heard agreeing with Marcus, adding his own crude comments about Sarah's abilities. The video showed other recruits looking uncomfortable but not speaking up, while Sarah tried to maintain her composure and focus on completing the exercise. Marcus and Derek watched the footage with growing horror, seeing themselves from an outside perspective for the first time. What had seemed like harmless joking to them looked cruel and unprofessional when viewed objectively. They could see the pain in Sarah's eyes, even though she tried to hide it. The next series of clips showed the survival exercise, including the stream crossing where Marcus and Derek had deliberately made things more difficult for Sarah. The footage revealed their calculated effort to sabotage her performance, their refusal to help her when she was struggling, and their loud complaints about her supposed incompetence. Sullivan paused the video and turned to face the assembled recruits. "Thompson and Hayes," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "What you have just seen represents a complete failure of leadership and military values. You have demonstrated that you are willing to sacrifice unit effectiveness to satisfy your own prejudices." Marcus tried to speak up, but Sullivan raised his hand for silence. "You will have your chance to respond, but first you will listen," the commander continued. "The woman you have been tormenting has consistently outperformed both of you in every category except raw physical strength. Her marksmanship scores are higher than yours. Her tactical knowledge is superior to yours. Her ability to function under pressure exceeds yours. Most importantly, her character and integrity are everything yours are not." He clicked the remote again, and the screen showed performance statistics for all the recruits. Sarah's scores were indeed higher than Marcus and Derek's in most categories, a fact that surprised many of the other recruits who had only witnessed the physical challenges where she struggled. "Martinez has completed every exercise without complaint," Sullivan said. "She has never made excuses for poor performance. She has never blamed teammates for failures. She has maintained military bearing and professionalism, even while being subjected to harassment that would have caused many soldiers to quit or file formal complaints. The commander's voice grew harder as he continued. Meanwhile, Thompson and Hayes have demonstrated that they are bullies who prey on anyone they perceive as different or vulnerable. They have shown that they value their own egos more than unit cohesion. They have proven that they cannot be trusted to support their fellow soldiers in challenging situations. Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out smaller and less confident than usual. "Sir, we were just trying to motivate her to do better. We thought if she understood the standards, she would either improve or realize this wasn't the right place for her." Sullivan's expression didn't change, but his eyes grew colder. "Thompson, do you remember what happened to you today during the exercise with Sergeant Anderson and Gunnery Sergeant Williams? Their menses? Things with her wide and consteresis." Thompson. Marcus nodded reluctantly. The memory of the day's humiliation still fresh and painful. "How did their motivation affect your performance?" Sullivan asked. Marcus had to admit that the constant criticism had made him nervous, unfocused, and prone to making mistakes he wouldn't normally make. "That's correct," Sullivan said. "Their treatment of you was designed to replicate exactly what you have been doing to Martinez. The difference is that today's exercise lasted only 8 hours. You have been subjecting Martinez to that treatment for 3 weeks." Derek spoke up, his voice defensive but shakier than before. "Sir, we didn't mean any harm. We just thought she needed to understand what she was getting into." Sullivan turned his attention to Derek, and his expression showed no mercy. "Hayes, you didn't mean any harm? Let me show you what harm looks like." He clicked the remote again, and the screen showed footage of Sarah from the survival exercise. The camera captured her shivering alone through the night after the stream crossing, fighting hypothermia, while her teammates slept comfortably nearby. It showed her forcing herself to continue the next morning despite being clearly unwell, never complaining or asking for special treatment. This soldier spent an entire night fighting hypothermia because you deliberately chose a dangerous stream crossing and refused to help her, Sullivan said. She could have suffered serious medical consequences. She could have died. And you thought that was acceptable because it served your purpose of making her look weak. The room was completely silent now. Even Marcus and Derek were beginning to understand the full scope of what they had done. "But here's what you failed to understand," Sullivan continued, his voice rising slightly. "By sabotaging Martinez, you sabotaged your entire unit. Military effectiveness depends on every member of the team being able to perform at their best. When you undermine one soldier, you undermine everyone." He clicked through more footage, showing how the dysfunction Marcus and Derek created had affected the performance of their other teammates during various exercises. Wilson and Garcia, both excellent soldiers, had their own performance compromised because they were forced to compensate for the chaos you created, Sullivan explained. Other recruits in the class have been distracted by your behavior instead of focusing on their own development. You have damaged this entire unit. Sullivan walked closer to Marcus and Derek, his presence imposing and intimidating. "In real combat situations, the kind of behavior you have displayed gets people killed," he said. "If you cannot trust and support every member of your unit, you are not fit to serve in any military capacity." He turned to address the entire group. The purpose of today's exercise was to teach Thompson and Hayes what their behavior feels like from the receiving end. I wanted them to understand how destructive their actions have been. But this lesson applies to all of you. Sullivan clicked the remote one final time, and the screen showed a different kind of footage. These clips showed moments when other recruits had witnessed the bullying but failed to speak up or intervene. Every person in this room who witnessed this behavior and did nothing also failed as a leader, Sullivan said. Military personnel have a duty to protect each other. When you see a fellow soldier being mistreated, your obligation is to stop it, not to look the other way. Several recruits shifted uncomfortably, realizing they were also being held accountable for their inaction. However, Sullivan continued, some of you did show real leadership during these situations. The screen now showed Wilson speaking up during the survival exercise, and Parker offering encouragement to Sarah during physical training, and several other small acts of support that various recruits had provided. "These are the soldiers who understand what military service really means," Sullivan said. "They understand that we are strongest when we support each other, not when we tear each other down. Whether not. He turned his attention back to Marcus and Derek. "Thompson and Hayes, you have a choice to make. You can learn from this experience and change your behavior completely, or you can leave this program immediately. There will be no third option." Marcus and Derek looked at each other, then at Sarah, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. She wasn't weak or incompetent. She was a dedicated soldier who had endured their abuse while continuing to excel in areas they had ignored. "If you choose to stay," Sullivan continued, "you will publicly apologize to Martinez for your behavior. You will demonstrate through your actions, not just words, that you have learned this lesson, and you will understand that any future behavior that undermines unit cohesion will result in immediate dismissal from this program." Marcus was the first to speak, his voice quiet and genuine. "Sir, I want to stay. I want to learn from this. I realize now that I was completely wrong, and I want to make it right." Derek nodded in agreement, looking directly at Sarah for the first time in weeks. "Me too, sir. I understand now what we were doing, and I'm ashamed of it. If Martinez is willing to give us a chance, I want to prove that we can be better." Sullivan looked at Sarah, giving her the opportunity to respond. Sarah stood up, maintaining her military bearing even in this emotional moment. "Sir, if they're serious about changing, I'm willing to work with them. We're all here to become better soldiers, and that means we all have to be willing to learn and grow." Her response surprised everyone, including Marcus and Derek. After everything they had put her through, she was willing to give them a chance to redeem themselves. Over the following weeks, the dynamic in the training unit changed completely. Marcus and Derek didn't just apologize to Sarah. They actively supported her and made sure other recruits treated her with respect. They used their physical strength to help her with challenges where size mattered, while learning from her superior tactical knowledge and marksmanship skills. The unit as a whole became stronger as they learned to value each member's unique contributions. Physical training became collaborative rather than competitive, with stronger recruits helping others improve instead of using their advantages to show off. Sarah continued to excel in the program, but now she did so with the full support of her teammates. Her confidence grew as she was finally able to focus on learning and improving rather than defending herself against constant attacks. Commander Sullivan watched this transformation with satisfaction, knowing that he had not only saved one soldier from harassment, but had taught an entire unit what real military leadership looked like. When the training program concluded 3 months later, every recruit who had witnessed Sullivan's lesson carried it with them into their future service. They understood that true strength came from building others up, not tearing them down. Sarah Martinez went on to become one of the most respected officers in her unit, known for her tactical brilliance and her ability to bring out the best in every soldier under her command. Marcus Thompson and Derek Hayes both became strong leaders as well, but they never forgot the lesson they had learned about the power of words and the importance of treating every soldier with dignity. Commander Sullivan retired from training 2 years later, but his influence continued through every soldier he had taught. His lesson about bullying and leadership became part of the culture at the training facility, ensuring that future generations of military personnel would understand that their greatest strength lay not in their individual capabilities, but in their ability to support and protect each other. The story became legendary among military training programs, not because of the punishment Sullivan had delivered to the bullies, but because of the transformation it had created in everyone involved. It proved that even the hardest lessons could be learned when they were taught with wisdom, justice, and a genuine commitment to making people better than they were before.